In 1969, in the quiet streets of Montpellier, France, a young American was spotted by an Air France flight attendant. She recognized his face from a wanted poster. Within moments, French police moved in, and one of the most extraordinary international fugitive cases came to an abrupt end. The man they arrested was just 21 years old. Yet according to the FBI, he had operated across multiple countries, cashing fraudulent checks and assuming identities for roughly 5 years. He was one of the youngest people ever placed on the Bureau's most wanted list. His name was Frank William Abagnale Jr. But here's the question that has haunted this story for decades. What if his greatest con wasn't on the banks or airlines, but on all of us? Frank William Abagnale Jr. was born on April 27, 1948, in Bronxville, New York, an affluent village in Westchester County, just north of New York City. By all appearances, his early life was comfortable and conventional. But when Abagnale was 16, his parents divorced. According to his own account, the event shattered his sense of stability. He ran away from home and never returned to the life he'd known. What happened next depends on who you believe. According to Abagnale's autobiography, co-written with journalist Stan Redding and published in 1980, the teenager embarked on an astonishing 5-year spree of impersonation and fraud. He allegedly impersonated a Pan American World Airways pilot for approximately 2 years, claiming to have flown over 1 million miles on more than 250 flights by deadheading, riding in the cockpit jump seat without actually operating the aircraft. Some journalists have since disputed the extent of these claims. He also allegedly posed as a pediatric resident at a Georgia hospital for approximately 11 months, and reportedly passed the Louisiana bar exam and worked briefly as an assistant attorney general. Each of these claims has been questioned by researchers. Abagnale presented himself as a man of extraordinary charm and intelligence, someone who could walk into any room and become whoever the situation required. It was a persona that would prove remarkably durable, surviving for decades. But was it real? What is not disputed is that Frank Abagnale cashed fraudulent checks across multiple U.S. states and several countries during the 1960s. The check fraud was real, documented, and prosecuted. Abagnale reportedly cashed approximately $2.5 million in fraudulent checks across as many as 26 countries, though the exact figure has been disputed. What's clear is that the scheme operated across a vast geographic range. The method was deceptively simple. In the 1960s, bank security relied heavily on personal presentation and visual cues. There were no digital verification systems. A man in the right uniform, carrying the right documents, could walk into a bank and walk out with cash. Abagnale has claimed he assumed at least 8 different identities during this period: a pilot, a doctor, a lawyer, a professor. He allegedly impersonated a sociology professor at Brigham Young University for a semester, another claim that has since been questioned. But in 2020, journalist Alan C. Logan published an investigation titled "The Greatest Hoax on Earth," which challenged virtually every major claim in Abagnale's autobiography. Logan's research reportedly found that Abagnale spent much of the period in question not living as a glamorous imposter, but incarcerated. According to Logan's findings, some former FBI agents and associates contradicted key elements of the autobiography. The romantic narrative of a teenage genius outsmarting the system began to look less like history and more like mythology. What remains undeniable is that Abagnale did commit check fraud on a significant scale. He did use forged documents. He did cross international borders while evading law enforcement. The crimes were real. It's the legend surrounding them that is now in question. The distinction matters. A check forger who operated across state lines is a serious federal criminal. But a teenage boy who impersonated a pilot, a doctor, and a lawyer, that's a folk hero. And folk heroes sell books, movies, and speaking engagements. The FBI investigated Abagnale throughout the mid to late 1960s. The Bureau tracked him for check fraud and impersonation across multiple jurisdictions, a complex multi-state pursuit in an era before computerized databases. Abagnale reportedly used numerous aliases and forged documents to stay ahead of investigators. Each time agents closed in on one identity, he would reportedly surface elsewhere under a new name, cashing checks at banks that had no way to verify his credentials in real time. The challenge for investigators was jurisdictional. Check fraud in one state didn't automatically trigger alerts in another. Abagnale exploited the seams in a fragmented law enforcement system, moving faster than information could travel between agencies. Abagnale's trail eventually led overseas. He was tracked across multiple countries by law enforcement as the scope of his check fraud extended beyond American borders. International cooperation in the 1960s was far more cumbersome than it is today. As the case files grew thicker, investigators built a pattern. A young man, always well-dressed, always confident, always moving. He targeted banks in cities where he had no history and left before anyone could connect the dots. The FBI's persistence was methodical. Agents compiled records from banks across dozens of states, cross-referencing handwriting samples, check serial numbers, and the descriptions provided by tellers who had interacted with the young man. It was a classic cat-and-mouse pursuit, but one that would ultimately end not through a dramatic American operation, but through a quiet moment of recognition thousands of miles from home. In 1969, in Montpellier, France, an Air France flight attendant recognized Frank Abagnale from a wanted poster. She alerted French police. He was 21 years old. French police arrested him. He was detained and imprisoned in France, beginning a journey through multiple foreign justice systems before he would face American courts. From France, Abagnale was extradited to Sweden, where he served approximately 6 months in a Swedish prison. The Scandinavian facility was austere but orderly, a stark contrast to what awaited him in the United States. He was then extradited from Sweden to the United States, where the full weight of federal charges awaited him. After years of movement across borders and identities, Abagnale was finally in American custody. For the young man who had allegedly lived in luxury hotels and flown across continents, the reality of a U.S. federal penitentiary was punishing. Concrete block walls, steel bunks, barred windows. The glamour was over. But even in custody, the Abagnale story was far from finished. What came next would prove to be the most remarkable and most enduring chapter of his life. In the United States, Frank Abagnale was convicted on multiple counts of forgery and fraud. The federal court sentenced him to 12 years in prison. For a man still in his early 20s, it was a crushing sentence, but Abagnale served only approximately 4 to 5 years of that sentence. He was released early under a remarkable arrangement. He would assist the FBI and other federal authorities with fraud investigations. The poacher would become the gamekeeper. After his release, Abagnale founded Abagnale and Associates, a fraud consultancy firm. He began a new career, teaching banks, corporations, and government agencies how to detect and prevent the very crimes he had committed. His relationship with the FBI as a consultant has continued for over 40 years, a fact that is well documented and not disputed. Whatever questions surround his past, his second career as a fraud expert is real. In 2002, Steven Spielberg directed a major film adaptation of Abagnale's autobiography, starring Leonardo DiCaprio and Tom Hanks. It grossed hundreds of millions of dollars worldwide and cemented the Abagnale legend in popular culture. A Broadway musical followed in 2011. Abagnale's story had become an entertainment franchise, but one built, according to recent investigations, on a foundation that may be far less solid than the public was led to believe. Alan C. Logan's 2020 investigation posed a devastating question. What if Frank Abagnale's greatest con was not the check fraud or the impersonations, but the story itself? What if he convinced the world he was something he largely was not? Logan's research reportedly used court records, prison logs, and documentary evidence to argue that Abagnale spent much of his supposed crime spree behind bars, not jetting around the world in a stolen uniform. If true, the autobiography was itself a kind of forgery. The Abagnale case raises uncomfortable questions about how readily we accept a compelling narrative. His charm worked not only on bank tellers in the 1960s, it worked on publishers, filmmakers, audiences, and even the FBI itself. Regardless of how much of his autobiography is accurate, Abagnale's real legacy may be in fraud prevention. His decades of consultancy work has helped institutions detect and prevent financial crimes, protecting countless potential victims. In the end, Frank Abagnale's story is a mirror. It reflects our fascination with audacity, our willingness to believe a good tale, and the thin, fragile line between a con artist and a storyteller. Frank Abagnale was convicted, imprisoned, and released to serve the very system he once defrauded. But decades later, the world is still trying to separate the man from the myth. And that may be the longest con of all. A new case drops every day. Subscribe so you never miss one.